This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by Fables, the Citadel of the Unseen Sun, which is now available.
This campaign brings you on a great adventure where your characters will oppose the unending darkness in the vampire realm of Astoya. As the world descends into unending darkness, your characters are the last shred of light for the world.
Fables is a complete campaign told in 6 episodes, with each episode debuting once per month over the next several months, and culminating in a pretty cool dungeon written by a pair of pretty talented dudes.
We did get to contribute to the final chapter of this campaign and design the dungeon that you get to play through. So if you are excited to jump into this campaign and see more of what Monty and I have created for grim, dark campaign settings, get ready because we're pretty proud of some of the great elements we got to throw into that dungeon.
And we got the chance to work with James Hake and some amazing other RPG authors that have all put so much incredible creativity into this work. So we are really excited to be a part of it and hope you check it out.
So check the links below to get your copy today. And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Callie McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for DMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are going to be talking about homebrewing expanded spell lists for the Sorcerer subclasses in D&D 5e.
One of the biggest complaints that we've heard about the new subclasses that were offered in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is that with their expanded spell list, they left the other subclasses in the dust. So we are taking a look at what spells we might use and what methods we might use to bring the other Sorcerer subclasses up to par with the Clockwork Soul and the Aberrant Mind.
Both the Clockwork Soul and the Aberrant Mind get 10 extra spells known over the course of the Sorcerer's career. From 1st level spells to 5th level spells, both these subclasses give the Sorcerer 2 new spells known, as well as giving the option to retrain some of these bonus spells for spells of specific schools available to Sorcerers, Warlocks, and Wizards. So because Sorcerers only get 15 spells known base, adding 10 extra spells known to the Sorcerer really gives them a lot more flexibility and access to a lot more spells and tools to amp up with their meta magic. And overall, we feel that the earlier Sorcerer subclasses released for D&D 5e do deserve this sort of treatment. While they do have some pretty strong and impressive features, the restrictiveness of only having so few spells known as the Sorcerer is something that we feel could be loosened up a little bit. So we're going to have some fun today and homebrew some expanded spell lists for these old classes.
So today we're going to go over the Draconic Sorcerer, the Wild Magic Sorcerer, the Storm Sorcerer, the Shadow Sorcerer, and the Divine Soul Sorcerer, and look at ways that we might expand on the spellcasting capabilities of these subclasses. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling. So getting started with the Draconic Sorcerer, we actually took an interesting approach here and borrowed some of what was done with the Genie Pact Warlock, in the sense that with the Genie Pact Warlock, you gain 5 spells no matter what, and then you choose which genie you are associated with, and that grants you 5 additional spells. Much in the same way, we are looking at 5 spells that all Draconic Sorcerers get, and then based on the element you choose to represent your dragon, you get 5 additional spells as well.
So the 5 spells that we chose that would be universal, that all Dragon Sorcerers would get, would be Chromatic Orb, Dragon's Breath, Protection from Energy, Fire Shield, which can also be a cold shield, and Summon Draconic Spirit, a new spell that was introduced in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. But then if you are a Fire, Cold, Lightning, Poison, or Acid Dragon Sorcerer, you get 5 extra spells, 1 of each level. And for some of these, it was really easy, and for some of them, we had to do a lot of digging.
This subclass actually broadcasted even further something that we've talked about before, which is the difference between having something like fire and cold damage versus how limited some other damage types are, like acid damage, which was a bit of a struggle to try to figure out what to give them.
Yeah, so for the fire dragons, it was super easy. We did Burning Hands, Scorching Ray, Fireball, Wall of Fire, and Flame Strike. Pretty much just hitting the greatest hits of each spell level for fire damage.
And carrying on with that theme, cold was relatively easy to look at as well. There's a lot of great cold spells out there. We're giving our cold dragons Ice Knife, Snowball Swarm, Sleet Storm, Ice Storm, and Cone of Cold. Again, very thematic options that I think any cold-branded sorcerer would be happy to have.
Now, it got a little bit more difficult with the lightning-based sorcerer, and so we kind of branched a little bit into thunder damage as well, because thunder and lightning, very, very frightening. So we went with Thunder Wave and Shatter for the first and second level spells, Lightning Bolt, Storm Sphere, and Destructive Wave for the 5th level spell, borrowing a little of inspiration from the Tempest Cleric here.
When we go to the Poison Sorcerer, this is where it got a little bit more difficult. With poison and acid damage, there's a lot less good options for spells. So we did have to kind of pick and choose as best we could. What we ended up with is the following. Ray of Sickness, Protection from Poison, Stinking Cloud, Blight, and Cloud Kill.
And with acid damage, we really had to scrape the bottom of the barrel for this, because there are not a lot of spells in D&D 5e that actually deal acid damage. So, of course, we do have Tasha's Caustic Brew at 1st level. We've got Melf's Acid Arrow at 2nd level. And then for 3rd level spells, turns out Hunger of Hadar does acid and cold damage. So we threw this in here, because why not? We do have Vitriolic Sphere at 4th level, which is not a great spell, but at least it's something. And we really struggled for the 5th level spell here, so we decided to go with Insect Plague, because it feels vaguely interesting for a black dragon acid damage sort of idea. We're kind of reaching here, and one of the things that we were tempted here is because acid damage is often associated with black dragons, and black dragons are often associated with water. We thought about bringing in like the control water, tidal wave, wall of water type of stuff, but we really felt we were stretching it here. This was definitely the hardest one, and we would love to hear your thoughts on how you would handle this.
If you have any other ideas on ways that you would bring these draconic sorcerers to life, please let us know in the comments. So that is a look at our expanded spell list for the draconic sorcerer. Again, they all gain 5 spells amongst all of them, and then depending on the elemental origin of your dragon sorcerer, you get 5 additional spells. So we also looked at a bit of a unique approach as we move into the wild magic sorcerer, where we wanted to up the spellcasting capabilities, bringing them on par with the other sorcerers, while maintaining the fun and unpredictability that the wild magic sorcerer brings.
We experimented with a couple early drafts where we thought about making a gigantic table of hundreds of spells that the wild magic sorcerer would roll on every day to find out what spells they had. And we didn't really like this because it was just too random. There's so many spells in D&D 5e, and while it is possible to throw them all onto a spreadsheet and roll like a D100 to see what spells you get, that is super random, and it also requires then building different tables for every spell level and doing a bunch of die rolling, and you never know what you're going to get. So we wanted something that had this randomness and this excitement behind it, but that still gave the player a little bit of choice to curate their decisions.
So here's what we went with. This is still in the workshop, so feel free to sound off in the comments on whether you think you would change or alter these in any way. But we decided that rolling 2d8 on a random list of the schools of magic might be a great way to start. You roll 2d8, and that determines which 2 schools of magic you get to choose your spell list from. If you roll doubles, you then take the number on the doubles as one of your schools of magic and pick a second one of your choice.
From there, you get to choose a number of spells equal to half your sorcerer level, rounded down from the sorcerer, warlock, and wizard spell list of those schools of magic, and you know those spells for that day. So, as an example, a 10th level sorcerer would roll 2d8s. Let's say they roll for Conjuration and Evocation. And then at that point, this sorcerer could choose 5 spells up to 5th level spells from any Conjuration or Evocation spell that is available to sorcerers and warlocks and wizards. So if you want to load up and you want to grab yourself Wall of Force, you want to grab yourself Cone of Cold, you want to grab yourself Conjure Elemental, go for it. We felt that it was kind of cool that you actually weren't restricted by the levels within that. So if you did want to grab a bunch of extra 5th level spells, well, that's fine. You're going to be limited on the number of spell slots you've got. It does give you a lot of choice here. And this means that even if you do roll up one kind of restrictive school, because the truth of the matter is that not all the schools of magic are created equally. There's a lot of evocation spells, pretty much of every level. But for some spells, there's not more than one or two. Like, for example, divination has some pretty limited choices. So this is why we decided not to have the sorcerer roll like for every level or roll specific levels of spells or anything like that, and just let it be open and flexible. That's what we like to try it out as a playtest sort of draft and see how good this feels.
We also thought that at 14th level, opening it up so that you can now roll 3 d8s and choose from 3 different schools of magic, allowing more versatility. There is sort of a give and take here. Obviously, with it being half your sorcerer level rounded down, this means that for majority of the game until you reach 20th level, you are gaining less spells than the other sorcerer subclasses. We think that this is equalized by the fact that you're getting to choose whatever spells you want. So you get to kind of pick whatever you think is going to be most beneficial and most powerful for you as a player. Because of that choice, we think that it balances out and means that this is actually a pretty powerful option. And it allows wild magic sorcerers to still have that randomness that we like from wild magic while not being restricted to ending up with some really bad choices. It gives both player choice and a random table. On top of that, we were concerned that maybe rolling on a random table every time you take a long rest and then picking a new batch of spells might be too clunky and overcomplicated. But when we compared it to something like the cleric, who whenever they take a long rest gets to pick from their whole list of available spells anyway, this doesn't really feel that much different.
Yeah, we think that probably what's going to happen is that most players that would have this subclass are going to have a couple go-to picks of every school of magic. For example, if I roll Evocation on my table, I'm probably going to gravitate towards Fireball or Wall of Force. If I roll up Abjuration, I'm probably going to want to grab something like Dispel Magic or Counterspell or Banishment. And if I roll something up along the lines of Divination, well, maybe today I am going to pick up Scrying or something like that. This is why we do feel like let the player choose if they roll doubles, maybe allow something that they can re-roll or have a little bit more flexibility. We want to try this out and see how it feels, but overall I think that this would add a lot of extra flexibility to the Wild Magic Sorcerer. One of the other ideas that we had here, though, was that the sorcerer didn't even have to roll. They just got to choose which ones they wanted to, with the trade-off that the spells that they choose always cause a wild magic surge.
So tell us your thoughts on the wild magic sorcerer and how you would expand their spell list in the comments below. But as we move on to the Storm Sorcerer, this one is a little bit more straightforward and what we would have expected from an expanded spell list. What I think is really important with the Storm Sorcerer, though, is my biggest grief with the Storm Sorcerer was that it didn't gain access to some of the amazing spells that really advertised the theme of this subclass. And I think by giving it an expanded spell list, we really bring the Storm Sorcerer to life, and I think this raises the value of the Storm Sorcerer a lot. So what did we pick?
We decided to give the Storm Sorcerer a combination of cold, lightning, and thunder spells, and we tried to find a couple of the spells that aren't already on the Sorcerer spell list. So we gave them Thunder Wave and Ice Knife, as well as Rhymes Binding Ice and Shatter, and we gave them Call Lightning and Sleet Storm. Before you get on us that we didn't give them Lightning Bolt is already on the Sorcerer's spell list, so that's why we chose Call Lightning over Lightning Bolt. We then gave them Control Water and Ice Storm, and then Cone of Cold and Destructive Wave.
I honestly think that this makes the Storm Sorcerer so much cooler by having these spells, and I do think the leniency of options here with storms not just being thunder and lightning, but also being water and ice is really thematic for this type of character.
As we were building the spell list, there was a lot of overlap with, for example, Druidic Magic or the Tempest Domain Cleric. In fact, in a lot of cases, this is pretty close to the Tempest Domain Cleric. But I think that this will give the Storm Sorcerer a much-needed boost. Probably, though, we would want to look at some of the other Storm Sorcerer's class features and tie some of those class features to the spells on its expanded spell list, saying that any of the spells on the expanded spell list trigger those features instead of it just being lightning or thunder damage.
As we move on to one of my personal favorite lists, the Shadow Sorcerer, you can actually watch our Shadows of Drakenheim recent episodes to see us using this expanded spell list in play. With the Shadow Sorcerer, we also get a pretty clear-cut theme here and chose spells that really feed into the theme that we think Shadow Sorcerer players want to see. We gave the Shadow Sorcerer Cause Fear and False Life, Darkness and Shadowblade, Animate Dead and Summon Shadowspawn, Dimension Door and Shadow of Moil, and Danse Macabre and Seeming.
Now, this spell list partially replaces the fact that Shadow Sorcerers already get Darkness, and so we're basically saying that they get Darkness from this new expanded spell list and can still cast it using sorcery points in order to see in their own darkness. So technically the Shadow Sorcerer is getting 9 extra spells instead of 10 extra because they already got Darkness as an extra, but 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
In our game, we're also trying out letting the Shadow Sorcerer replace any of these spells with Necromancy or Illusion spells of the same level.
It makes for a pretty potent package that kind of combines that summoning shadow stuff, dealing with undead, and dealing with illusions all together in one really fun expanded spell list that has had some pretty good impacts so far in play. So this is one we've been trying out in our live stream games, and I felt like it's just been a bonus.
As we move on to the Divine Soul, this is another one that is pretty straightforward, but a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. The Divine Soul Sorcerer is already a very interesting option because they get the entire Sorcerer spell list and the entire Cleric spell list. Now, that's all well and good, but you still are limited by the amounts of spells known. So Monty and I had some pretty intense discussions about how to bring the Divine Soul up without overpowering it. And so there's kind of a give and take that we've thought about here.
Yeah. Our proposed solution is that instead of being able to choose any spell they want from the Cleric spell list, the Divine Soul gets to choose a Cleric domain and gets that as their expanded spell list. But then they are allowed to retrain the spells got from their domain for any other spell on the Cleric spell list of the appropriate level. We think that this kind of moderates this feature out a little bit better. It sort of smooths it over rather than giving them complete free reign. Although we would be interested to hear your feedback and thoughts on this. Should we just give them the Cleric domain and still let them choose any of the Cleric spells? Should we not let them choose any Cleric spells at all and lock them in with only the domain spells? Or should we allow some measure of retraining available? We're not entirely sure which direction to go with, but the thing that I think is most intuitive is building up that Cleric flavor, building up the association with a deity by having the Divine Soul choose a Cleric domain.
What's really interesting here is that when we were first discussing it, I was worried that we were taking too much away from the Divine Soul Sorcerer by removing the option for them to choose any Cleric spell. But when I look at it closer, one of the big limitations is, yeah, you had 2 spell lists, but you still only got 15 spells. In this case, you're actually getting 25 spells known throughout your career as a sorcerer, which is a much more robust list of spells. You still get to choose your favorite sorcerer spells, but then your 10 extras are just added to your spells known from the Cleric spell list by choosing a domain. And I think being able to swap them out for other Cleric spells really does add still a lot of value here. Yeah, you're only getting up to 5th level Cleric spells, but honestly, that's where some of the best ones are.
It is, although I do like the idea of the Divine Soul being able to pick up spells like Heal or Divine Word or Holy Aura. So I think that there's a little bit of playtesting finesse here, because I do think Divine Souls with some of those higher level Cleric spells are pretty cool. So maybe we allow them to retrain a little bit more flexibly or something like that. Or maybe we give them a little bit more options in that respect. But for me, the coolest point here is starting with the Cleric domain.
And honestly, at the end of the day, we gave the Divine Soul Sorcerer an S tier. And worst case, this might drag them down to an A, which is probably better.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a big concern with expanding the Sorcerer spell lists that combined with our meta magic, it is a giant boost in the status quo versus is this Sorcerer, when we compare the Sorcerer to the Warlock and the Wizard. And I will say that probably the Warlock deserves the same treatment too. The Warlock in this conversation probably deserves extra spell slots and deserves to just have their expanded spell list given to them hook, line, and sinker, right? Does this end up leaving the poor wizard in the dust? I'm still not sure. Like, the flexibility of the wizard spell list is pretty wide, and maybe we do need to then say, okay, in a world where sorcerers and warlocks get a huge expanded spell list, what does that mean for the wizard? Perhaps maybe it just means the wizard needs to be able to prepare a couple more spells.
So with all of that in mind, we would love to hear your thoughts. This is kind of a workshop episode for Monty and I, and has been something that our audience has sounded off on wanting to see from us for a long time. These are things that we are still playtesting, and really with our games have only been able to acutely playtest one of these spell lists. The rest we're kind of dabbling in and trying out here and there, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on if you've tried any expanded spell lists in your games. How did it work out for you? Did it feel right? Did it bring these sorcerers up to a level that makes them a valid choice above or equal to the Clockwork Soul and the Aberrant Mind? Or was it too powerful, and given that these sorcerers were made before expanded spell lists were an option, was it okay with their abilities and spell class features? Let us know about all of that in the comments below.
The videos that we make on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. Many thanks to all of you who had chats with us on our Patreon Discord about these expanded spell lists as we developed those ideas and workshopped a couple of the early concepts along. If you enjoy the work that Kelly and I do here on YouTube and want to join our Discord community, consider becoming a patron of our show by following the links in the description below.
And don't forget to check out our live plays in the world of Drakenheim, which air Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the episodes from the previous season right up over here.
And we've got plenty more about homebrewing, new ideas for D&D 5e in our video series right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.